Trump's takeover of Washington has begun with roughly 800 members of the National Guard being deployed to assist law enforcement in the country's capital. For more on the legality and the impact of this, we're joined now by constitutional law expert and historian Joshua Kastenberg. All right, Josh, let's go through and start with the federal takeover of D.C. Does something like this need to meet a certain set of criteria, or does the president have the power to do this without any consultation?
Thanks. Washington, D.C., and their home rule is established by statute. They're not a state like California is, or New Mexico, or Virginia. So the president has some increased authority over the District of Columbia. And when D.C. achieved home rule in 1973 through a congressional act, it gave to the president the ability to, on a very narrow basis, take over the policing duties of DC, as well as to use the National Guard as a police force. That kind of power is not known in the 50 states, which the Constitution would limit the president's ability to do that significantly there. However, the law contemplates that there actually is an emergency, that the police are not able to do their job, and that the mayor and the chief of police are wholly ineffective or unwilling to do their job. And so what President Trump has decided to do is to define in his own sense of what constitutes, an emergency, the ability to do a federal takeover of the police forces and to use the National Guard to join in the policing of the nation's capital. It's remarkable because DC's crime level was decreasing at the very time he claimed that the police were unable to do their job under the current leadership of the city.
Well, Josh, the mayor of D.C. has called this move by Trump unsettling and unprecedented. Is that correct? Is it fair to say that we've never seen anything like this before in America's capital?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, this is not like the Civil War in 1861. It's not like the immediate aftermath of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. Let's keep in mind, Mayor Muriel Bowser is a very popular, thrice democratically elected mayor by the people of DC, with an astounding majority that you don't normally find in the United States. The chief of police has the confidence of the residents, the citizens of the people of Washington, D.C., who have not expressed any widespread opposition to that team. And so you have a peacetime takeover of a city function, a democratically placed city function. And what makes it even more unsettling is that the framers of our Constitution, 250 odd years ago, created that document with the idea that we would not be able to have an Oliver Cromwell take over Parliament sort of, environment. It was based on a fear of standing armies. In other words, only in the threat of a national invasion or a widespread insurrection should the president, who is commander in chief under the Constitution, but should a president be able to use the military to police the American citizenry, because that was seen as a step towards tyranny. And we're not talking about a radical idea. This was an idea that came over from Great Britain after Cromwell and that period of time ended. And it was talked about and embraced by people like Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, and those men who voted to ratify the Constitution in the 13 states. So really what makes this remarkable is it's antithetical to that basic constitutional notion.
Well, Josh, a landmark trial has kicked off this week over Trump's use of the National Guard in
Yeah.
Los Angeles, and the judge will decide whether the government violated a 19th century law that forbids the U.S. military from taking part in civil law enforcement. How strong of a case do you think the state of California has here, and do you think we could see D.C. follow suit with a similar legal challenge?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the states are in a different position than the nation's capital. The Posse Comitatus Act occurs during the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and it's because the army was being used to not only police southern states, but it also had taken over the judicial functions in southern states. And during the Civil War, it took over some judicial functions in the northern states as well. And so Congress reassessed what the power of the president should be. And so it significantly limited the powers of the president back to the traditional constitutional basis. California, the city of Los Angeles, if you listen to the earlier words of, say, the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem about how they were there to affect political change by the federal, call up of National Guard, California has a great case based on the Constitution. That doesn't mean they're going to win. And there are legal doctrines where the courts can say, well, this is really a political question. You may have the law on your side, but it can only be addressed by the other two branches of government. That's a possibility, and then California loses. But California does have the constitutional norms on their side. Now, that's different than Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. does not have the same sort of constitutional protections that one of the 50 states does. The 10th Amendment and the militia clauses in the Constitution, and the idea that the federal government is a government of only limited powers doesn't apply in the same manner in D.C. as it does to the 50 states. I don't believe that it's merely a coincidence that on the very day that you have a case going on in Los Angeles, you have the use of the National Guard to police Washington, D.C. This could have happened at any time in Washington, D.C. And so I think what this is doing is trying to normalize the use of the military in a manner of policing where the military was never designed to be used for in the first place. And then you couple that with the summit going on in Alaska between, President Putin and President Trump, and it does lend to the appearance that President Trump is in a very strongman type position as he goes in to meet with President Putin to have this ability to use the military for what he sees fit to do.
Well, Josh, there's lots to talk about. That's all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your insights. We appreciate them.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
That is constitutional law expert and historian Joshua Kastenberg.